Hello, everybody. This is Jennifer Matarese, and before I get started on the episode today, I'd just like to take care of the usual housekeeping. For starters, paid requests are now reopened. If you are interested in submitting a disaster request, please double-check the list of requests I most recently posted to the podcast's Facebook and Tumblr accounts to make sure your request has not already been made. Also, please look through past episodes to verify I haven't already covered the disaster in question. To submit a request, you can send a donation of $30 or more to the podcast's PayPal at disasterarea@mail.com, on Venmo at Disaster Area Podcast, or on Cash App at Disaster Area Pod. Just add the names of the disaster to the notes on your donation. If you have an idea for an episode subject but you're not sure if it qualifies, feel free to message me and I can approve one way or another, although I usually do. This particular episode is a subject of my own choosing, not one that I chose because of recent events, just one that happened to coincide with recent events. If you'd still like to help support the podcast, you can do so with a one-time donation through PayPal, Venmo, or Cash App, or on a per-episode basis through Patreon at www.patreon.com/disasterareapodcast. A per-episode donation of even as little as $1 an episode can help me do things like pay the rent and keep the lights on. And if you do join the Patreon, you will get new episodes ad-free as soon as I record them, rather than waiting until they are released. So if you do become a patron, I would very much appreciate it. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook at Disaster Area Podcast, on Instagram at Disaster Area Pod, and on Tumblr at Disaster Area-podcast. Also, please think about rating and reviewing the podcast on whichever podcast app that you might listen to me on. And as always, the sources for each new episode can be found at disasterareapodcast.wordpress.com and in the episode description wherever you might be listening to me. The sources for this episode include the documentary Miracle on 4th Street, a report from the United States Secret Service using the shooter as part of a case study of the link between domestic violence and mass attacks, a timeline provided by the Washington Post, a YouTube video from KPRC2 in Houston, Texas, titled Sutherland Springs Shooter Recorded His Confession to Severe Beating of Stepson, and another YouTube video from Ken's 5 out of San Antonio entitled Victim Stories Heard through videos of Sutherland Springs church services. Sources also include I'm Not a Hero, man who shot and chased Texas church gunman shares his story from Time magazine. Texas church gunman lied about past to become a security guard record show, and conspiracy theorists harass Sutherland Springs churchgoers, pastor whose daughter was killed, from the Washington Post. From the first deadly shot until the last, how the Texas church shooting unfolded, from news.com.au. Comal County authorities didn't charge Sutherland Springs gunman with rape, even though the victim described brutal attack. And exclusive, guilt and grief overwhelm the mother-in-law of the Sutherland Springs gunman, from the San Antonio Express News. Texas massacre survivors say gunman, and then his name, became enraged by scared children during church shooting, from the New York Daily News. Site of deadliest church shooting in U.S. history is torn down over protests by some Texas families, and Air Force must pay more than $230 million in church shooting, from the Associated Press. And Texas church shooting video shows gunman's methodical attack, officials say, from the New York Times. As per usual with episodes about mass shootings, I will only use the name of the shooter once during the episode. For the rest of the episode, he will be referred to as the gunman, the shooter, the perpetrator, etc. There will be swearing in this episode as well, in multiple quotes from the shooter, so please keep that in mind if you are listening to this at work or in a place where children might hear. I will also be using alternate names for the gunman's 2 wives to respect their privacy given what they experienced at the hands of their husband. They do not deserve to be dragged into this, nor do his children, and so for that matter, none of their names will be shared. I will be sharing the names of the relatives of some of his second wife's family members, some of those family members, but not his wives and not his children. Also, given the events of this episode and the background of the shooter, I would like to issue a trigger warning for the deaths of children, domestic abuse against women and children, and mentions of sexual assault and rape against women, teenage girls, and girls. If you would prefer to skip this episode because of that, I completely understand. I would also like to thank the people who have been checking in on me while I have not been recording episodes. I have been working on episodes, but I have been a little preoccupied with maintaining my mental health and working. So thank you so much for checking in on me. I'm so sorry if I haven't gotten back to you yet, but I'm okay. It's actually my birthday today. It's the September 29th. So happy birthday to me. And with all of that taken care of, thank you very much for listening and welcome to Disaster Area. Episode 258, The Sutherland Springs Church Shooting, Part 3, November 5th, 2017, 27 deceased, 22 injured. At the end of the last episode, the future shooter, the future murderer, future perpetrator, and Annie, who was his previous victim, several years, 6 years prior to this, they got married. It had only been 6 years, like I said, since that previous very traumatizing early relationship. And Annie at this point is only 19. The shooter is 23, and they get married. This is not like his marriage to Mary, and that he doesn't wait a little bit after the wedding before he starts abusing Annie. He starts abusing Annie before they have even gotten married. She already knows what he's like. She knew him as a teenager, so he really doesn't have to hide that. Prior to the wedding, they'd moved in together into that apartment in the barn on his parents' property, and she'd gotten pregnant. He took care of that problem with a stiff kick to the stomach. Kicks her in the stomach, she loses the baby. That's the end of that. Now that they were married, he made her continue to work. But he didn't make much of an effort to fill out his own LinkedIn profile online. Why should he get a job? Annie had some money from a legal settlement. She, like I said, she had been abused when she was younger, and there had been a lawsuit or something along those lines where she had, she had been given a large settlement, and that was some money that she could use to take care of herself. But he starts, using that until there's like nothing left in the account. He's using that to, not like pay bills or anything. He's using them to like buy more guns and things like, buy all kinds of things that you probably shouldn't be wasting your money on when you don't have a job. Annie filled the role Mary vacated as the shooter's punching bag. If there was a way he could hurt her, whether it be with his fists pummeling her in the chest, his feet kicking her hard in the ribs, his hand in the cookie jar of her legal settlement, or a continuation of the same sexual violence he perpetrated against her in their teens, he would do it. If he wasn't threatening her, he was hurting other women or issuing threats against the ones she was related to. He did that with her. She had a stepmom and an adoptive mom, and he was threatening both of them. He was threatening her brother, her parents. Like he was targeting whoever he needed to get her to do what he wanted. Not long after he and Annie married, Colorado police would arrest the gunman for abusing their dog, something he did in an effort to hurt his wife, and he received a misdemeanor for animal cruelty as a result. Now, you may be wondering, when did they move to Colorado? Here's the thing. This person who had done all sorts of things, who had gone to prison already, who had all sorts of violent crimes against women in his background, who had marijuana possession in his background, who had all of these different things, he decides that he wants to move to Colorado so he can get legal pot. Which seems weird for somebody who's willing to break the law when it comes to violence or getting guns or anything like that, he is clearly not fine with trying to find pot in Texas. Now, if you ever look up what the legality of marijuana is in terms of which state is which, you're going to find that there are certain states where certain areas too where there's more legality. Federally, it's still up in the air. It's still legal, illegal, and all of that. But per state, it's legal in certain states. It's either medically legal or decriminalized. You can get it legally in shops, whatever, or you can just get like CBD with THC, or you can't get anything at all. And the thing about being in Texas is that you have to drive an obscene amount of hours to get anywhere. Now, for him to go to like another state to get pot, if he wanted to get it legally, would take him a while. I don't know why he wouldn't do that. He has, he can just do that. He doesn't have a job. In the case of, for example, me, Pennsylvania has medical marijuana, but it does not have like just legalized marijuana where you can go to a dispensary and get it. However, Pennsylvania is surrounded by like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 states, give or take. And of those, now you have West Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, New York, and Ohio. Of those states, all of them have marijuana legally and medicinally. You can go and just go over the state line and go get it. In Pennsylvania, you can get it medically, but you can't get it, just go and get it. You have to get a medical card, and then you have to get it. So, if you live in Pennsylvania and you just don't want to go get a medical card, you can drive for a couple hours, go over the nearest state line. It may take you a while if, for example, you're in State College, which is in the center of the state, but you can drive across the state line, go get pot or, gummies or whatever, and then come back. You can't really do that in Texas, I don't think, just considering the states that are around it. So, yeah, moving to Colorado if you want to get legal pot, it makes a lot of sense, considering Colorado is, like, the bottom corner of Colorado is just, like, the panhandle of Oklahoma away from Texas. It's still a far drive from wherever he is. So they had to move to an entirely different state so he could just get pot. But while they're there, he's still abusing her, and he abuses their dog in an effort to upset her, and it works out about as well as you expect. He gets that misdemeanor for animal cruelty. Now, he hand waves the incident to Annie's family. He's like, the charges were trumped up. I didn't do that, all of that. But that charge would prevent the shooter from getting a gun carry license when they moved back to Texas the following year. However, you simply need to pass a background check to be able to own a gun in Texas, something that Gunman would be able to do despite his criminal charges because of a mistake on the part of the Air Force. In December of 2014, he bought a Glock Model 19 9mm semi-automatic handgun while they were still in Colorado. Annie would unfortunately come to face the same dangers Mary did when it came to her new husband. He bullied her disabled brother. He would make her answer phone calls from her mom and other members of the family on speakerphone so he could hear both sides of the discussion. And he would hang up on the person calling if he decided he didn't like what he heard. In March of 2015, Annie gave birth to a little boy. The shooter did about as much as you'd expect with a newborn baby, which was next to nothing. But considering what he'd done to the last infant in his care, that might arguably have been a good thing. And that is kind of why they moved back to Texas, so his family could help out with taking care of the baby. Because instead of changing diapers and making bottles, he instead spent most of his time in Colorado at the time, high on whippets, pot, and whatever medications Annie possessed. He was like stealing her muscle relaxants and all of these things. He was just whatever it would take for him to get high, he would take it. Within a year, Annie worried about her son being harmed by the same man who abused and manipulated her on a daily basis. She kept trying to tell the shooter she wanted a divorce, and he kept hitting her and cutting her off from her family. The only way the marriage would end, he told Annie, was with one of them in a body bag. This was about the time the gunman gained a new interest, reading about the mass murderers whose ranks he would join in a few short years. When 9 people were murdered at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, 3 months after the birth of his son, the gunman messaged a former supervisor in the military. "Boy, I wish I had the nerve to do that," he told her. Kill people instead of animals, that is. And of course, he got more and more obsessed with guns. You know how sometimes you buy yourself a little treat even though it means less money for groceries? Well, he was like that, but instead of Lego sets or craft supplies or predictable romance novels, it was guns and gun parts and bullets for guns and tactical gear to go with the guns, all the supplies that you could possibly think of. That's what he was getting. "Guns don't kill people," he would tell Annie. "Bad people kill people with guns." And then the bad guy in this story would go and buy more gun stuff. In April of 2016, according to the Secret Service report, he bought a Ruger AR-556 semi-automatic rifle along with another 30-round magazine and the ammo he needed for that rifle. The rifle would be the one he gripped as he got out of his car at First Baptist Church a year and a half later. That summer, he went to counseling about twice a week. It was something like 3 months, 23 times he went. So he was going to counseling. He complained about the stress he was under, his inability to sleep, that he thought Annie was cheating on him. When his Medicaid was cut off, however, he stopped going. He already had financial problems, God knew, and presumably because he was still refusing to get a job, and counseling cost money. So instead of going to counseling, he decided to shut himself at home and be a jerk on the internet. He sent a message to one of his former military supervisors. Again, like I said, there were several that were female, and he just keeps doing this. He sent this message that said, and again swearing, quote, "Hey, you stupid bitch. You should have been put in the ground a long time ago. Better hope I don't ever see you. You can't face facts." And then he called her another crass sexist insult. The supervisor reported him, but backed down on getting him thrown in jail for the threats. If she did, he might get her home address on the court documents, and she couldn't risk it. It was just one more example in a very short life of the legal system failing not only his female victims prior to 2017, but by extension, also those 26 victims in that small church in Sutherland Springs. He also got into a discussion in the comment section, a comment section on social media about mass shooters, if you want to call it a discussion. In one comment, he wrote, quote, "Mass murderers don't do it because of video games. They do it because they are tired of all the fucking bullshit in the rigged system and the hate that breeds in almost 90% of humans. And it's time for payback. Most of them, anyway." Close quote. In another comment elsewhere, he said about mass shooters that they were, quote, "impossible to detect. I'm pretty sure they don't go around acting crazy, screaming to the world, but they are very careful, just like serial killers. So they pass psych evals anyway." Close quote. Which is a particularly galling comment from someone who'd been identified as a potential threat by multiple people over the course of his adult life and spent months in counseling and inpatient mental health treatment. He also stated he was an atheist now and derided the faith of his wife's family along with anybody else. So, yeah. In May of 2017, Annie gave birth to the couple's second child, a daughter. A child she'd gotten pregnant with because the shooter committed the common abusive tactic of screwing around with her birth control. He basically took it away from her. She didn't really have a choice. Also, he wasn't really giving her a lot of choice about having sex with him. He was, once again, committing sexual violence against his wife. And so now she had another baby. As she was agonizing in that hospital room, her husband was texting her mom, Michelle Shields. Shields received a handful of angry texts from her son-in-law as she sat in the waiting room, along with her mother, Lula White. The texts demanded that she and the rest of the family not come anywhere near him, Annie, or their kids. Quote, "I will personally make it my mission to destroy your entire life," he stated in a text Shields shared with the San Antonio Express-News. Quote, "I suggest you don't test my resolve. You think this is a fucking game? It's not." The argument was that another part of the gunman's mission to keep Annie separated from her family, like so many men abusing their partners do. He'd already spent the past few months texting Annie's stepmom, asking for nude photos, and starting a fight at his brother-in-law's birthday party. Engaging with him was like willingly tap dancing through a minefield. Shields didn't press. She didn't force her way into the hospital room. She feared just what the future shooter might do, where that shooter might take her daughter and her grandkids if she tried to press anything, if she tried to fight back, anything like that. They could end up going anywhere and just cutting off contact completely, and she didn't want that. So she was trying to handle the whole situation with kid gloves. Clearly, the shooter had a problem with mistreating his wives, to say the very least. But they weren't the only women to feel his wrath. Obviously, as I've mentioned before, he was threatening his supervisors, he's threatening his wife's relatives, her mom, everybody. But over the course of his adult life, the gunman would repeatedly commit violent sexual assaults and rapes, and would rarely, if ever, face punishment for them. I could go into excruciating detail regarding the many women he attacked over the years, especially considering the Secret Service report on the gunman mentions multiple incidents of sexual violence committed against women he knew and women he didn't know. But given just how many incidents there are, we could probably spend an entire episode simply on those. Suffice it to say, there were a bucketful of occasions where, over the years, in which the shooter could have been arrested and hopefully prosecuted with prison time for sexual assault and rape. There were a bunch of times. He would get caught, too. One girl had been assaulted by him twice at his parents' house, and she texted Annie and said, "This is what's happening to me." And Annie apologized for what happened and blocked her. And there were times where police officers, they would get reports of what happened, but then the person who reported it would go, "Well, I don't feel safe. I don't think he's, I don't think it's going to be safe if I continue this." Or they just didn't respond to a police officer's calls to follow up. Like it was just this continuing cycle of him just getting away with so much. Unfortunately, we don't live in a world where many attacks of that nature are taken seriously. In 2013, the Comal County Sheriff's Office didn't proceed with rape charges against the gunman when they were unable to retain contact with the victim, who'd been attacked on those two separate occasions, one of which happened in his family home. That rape charge, if carried through to the appropriate outcome, would have prevented the gunman from obtaining the weapons he would later use in the First Baptist attack. So there were times where they could have gotten him in regards to the sexual assaults that he committed, but he would end up being so threatening to the victims that they would step back and dismiss the charges or not help or anything like that. In the June preceding the massacre, the perpetrator applied to be a security guard at Schlitterbahn Water Park in New Braunfels, Texas. Now, I don't know if this is the same Schlitterbahn. I don't think so. I think that one is in Oklahoma. But there is a story about a disaster at a Schlitterbahn water park that some of you, as soon as I said that, you may go, "Oh, I know that story." And I may cover that one of these days, or may cover some disasters at water parks and amusement parks. That's one of those stories that I would like to tell. It is not pretty, and it's not a lot of fun. It is the death of a child, but it's just something where you can see the bad thing coming. So anyway, that was the first thing I thought about when I saw that he applied to be a guard at Schlitterbahn. Is that the same one? Given his previous violations and time spent in prison, he should not have passed the background check through the Texas Department of Public Safety, despite the position being unarmed. He was basically just, supposed to be on a bike, riding around at night, making sure there's nobody in the park. He lied on his application about his past troubles, for example, stating that he hadn't been discharged from the military, but a background check should have caught it. It did not. So every work night, he'd toddle off to work right after he put cinder blocks against the front door so Annie and the kids couldn't leave the apartment. He only lasted a mere 5 weeks in the night security job there, dismissed for not being, quote, a good fit, per a spokesperson for the park. Within 2 months, he'd get another security guard job, this one at an RV park. Now, part of the reason that I got the impression that he got fired from that job was because while he was at work, he would keep checking in on Annie. He gave her she had a tablet, and he would keep in constant contact with her, and if she didn't respond, he would leave work and go home and check on her, which he didn't need to do, but he kept doing it because it was the way that he was keeping control over her and over the kids. Not long after he was fired from the water park, the gunman ended up having his car towed after being pulled over by a Comal County deputy constable. His inspection was 8 months out of date, and he didn't have insurance. When the cop had his car towed, the future gunman simply called a relative for a lift. There was no arguing, no fighting back, no insults, no hint that he might be a danger to dozens of other people only a few short months later. There was nothing that made the deputy suspect that he might be a problem. Meanwhile, he'd already started planning what he would do on November 5th. He made notes on his phone, delete Instagram and Facebook, put mag funnel back on, and change out all batteries on October 28th, and then check the tire pressure and put dog tags for his son in buried location on October 30th. On October 18th, he picked up another Ruger handgun. On October 28th, he ordered 2 100-round high-capacity drums for the rifle. That would be the same day he would post on social media, "Remember the 5th of November." A casual passerby who read that would think it referred to Guy Fawkes Night, as it usually does, but it would turn out to be a morbid Easter egg. Now, I mentioned those 200-round high-capacity drums for the rifle. He ordered them on the 28th. He didn't go and pick them up before the shooting, so he didn't have those. Now, all of this happened right about the time that the shooter defecated on himself. So you think I'm joking. I am not. His anxiety at the time was so intense, he could not control himself. So his mom made him go see a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist gave him clonazepam. So he started taking it with Xanax, which is double what he was prescribed. That's 2 benzos. That is not good at all. 5 days prior to the attack, the shooter took Annie and his kids to have a little fun at a familiar place, the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs. That day, it was holding its fall festival, and Michelle Shields and her mother Lula White were there. It was the first time Annie got to see her family in months, and the first time some of them got to see the new baby. They hadn't even gotten to see that baby when it was born. Again, just as in that hospital months earlier, Michelle Shields, she's not pushing, she's not trying to start a fight, anything like that. She is just like, "Oh, I'm so happy to see you," trying to play it cool and calm. At the time, she learned the shooter had been prescribed and was taking medication to help with his mental issues. She didn't know he was doubling up on benzodiazepines. Things, as far as Shields saw it, weren't perfect, but they were hopefully looking up. She spent some time with Annie and the baby, and her son-in-law wandered off. It seemed innocent at the time. Later, she thought perhaps that he was casing the joint, so to speak. Now, he had been at that church before. Like I said in the first episode, he had people there who could recognize him. If not Lula White, who was his grandmother-in-law, then Pastor Pomeroy. At one point, I don't know if it was during the fall festival or during a previous visit, he went up to the shooter, the future shooter, and was talking to him to say, look, I know that you're doing these things to your family, that you're causing them problems, and you're going to need not to do that. You need to stop doing that. And kind of put him in his place. And the shooter, as far as I know, didn't take it very well from the sound of things. But, I mean, there were times where he had gone to First Baptist where he had been there for services, and he'd been like laughing during services when it wasn't appropriate. Like he was being rude, either unintentionally or intentionally. The night before the incident at First Baptist, the gunman walked off the job at the RV park, saying that he had a headache. The past few days had been a whirlwind. He'd been cranky at work. He told Annie's family he'd found photos from her childhood abuse in her mom's house, and angrily told them this would all end on November 5th. Then he couldn't provide the photos when police arrived at his home. Police got called by, I believe, the stepmom, and so they go to his house and say, you said you had these photos, or you found these photos, where are they? And he was just, there like, well, I don't have them, I have a gun, you need to leave. Like he's being exactly what you would expect him to be at the time. Now, as he arrived home on the night of November 4th into the 5th, Annie told him she wanted a divorce. Fine, he said. They could go to the courthouse on Monday to take care of it. The shooter would be dead by then. That same night, he texted one of his sisters. Quote, I am simply not there, a shell of a person, he said as part of his text messages. Quote, I'm more comfortable around people with my mask on. At that moment, the mask he would wear the following day was likely in a black bucket near his front door, along with all of the other gear for the next day. He actually had them, like some of these things in a bucket. He had his guns like in a duffel bag, ready to go. He had on his list that he had to put the weapons in the car when Annie couldn't see him. So, I mean, there was just a lot of planning that he did to get ready for that next day. On the morning of November 5th, the shooter put his plan into action. He held a gun to Annie's head after breakfast. They get up, she makes him breakfast, he eats his breakfast, he throws it up, he's clearly nervous, and then she goes in to make the bed or something, and he holds a gun on her. Now, their son is in the room. Their toddler son is right there. He forces her to lay face down on the bed. He's securing her feet and her ankles with her wrists with handcuffs, tape, and rope. He is just getting her all over. Annie at that time told her son not to look. She's like, look away. The shooter then went out of the room, removed all of his gear from the black bucket near the door, and starts putting it on. He's putting on, he's dressed in black. He's got his boots on. He's putting on his mask and his tactical vest and all of the things that he had, getting guns ready and all of that. When he departed the house at approximately 10:30 a.m., he did so wearing his black clothes and tactical vest and carrying a duffel bag and a rifle. As he drove to the church, he texted his parents, quote, I'm sorry, I love you guys. Please go untie Annie in the barn. The gunman chose First Baptist in an attempt to target his mother-in-law, Michelle Shields, but the woman he intended to kill wasn't even there that day. Only his grandmother-in-law, Lula White, had attended that day's services. He didn't bother to check if Shields was there first, or if her car was outside, or take his wife's phone and pretend to be her to text and check if she'd be there. And if he did notice she wasn't there, it certainly didn't stop him from committing the deadliest mass shooting in the history of Texas, the deadliest in a house of worship in America, and what is currently the 5th deadliest mass shooting in modern American history. All of which could be topped tomorrow or the next day or the day after that. He had the opportunity where he could have checked to see if Michelle Shields had gone to church. He could have taken Annie's phone and texted her mom and, said, oh, are you at church? All he had to do was ask, oh, are you at church? Is anybody at church? That sort of thing. It could have been part targeting his mother-in-law. It could have also been, the fact that Pastor Pomeroy came up to him and said, you've done something wrong and you need to not do that to your family. So it could have been a little of both, but there is the fact too that when you see his texts printed in that Secret Service report, he has a distinctive way of writing where there are certain words that he spells incorrectly, like your, and he uses TOO instead of TO. Like he has common misspellings, and it's possible that maybe he didn't think to use the phone to try and get in touch with Michelle Shields just in general, or he realized that he and Annie might not, maybe Annie was better with the phone, maybe she didn't do that. There are lots of reasons that he may not have done that, but there were ways that he could have checked if she was in that church, and he didn't. The investigation into the Sutherland Springs attack made it clear that the Air Force didn't just forget to submit the shooter's conviction to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System compiled by the FBI. It would turn out that hundreds of people convicted of crimes by the Air Force also avoided being reported and submitted to the NICS system. Now, I don't know if that's NICS system or NICS system, but it just wasn't submitted. That meant hundreds of offenders who shouldn't have been allowed to obtain a weapon following their convictions, but may have been able to walk into any American gun store and walk out with a handgun or rifle because of mistakes on the part of the Air Force. Because of this, the injured and the families of the victims brought a lawsuit against the Air Force, with their lawyers requesting $418 million as compensation for the military's fumbling the ball when it came to preventing violence on the part of the shooter. Again, it wasn't just this shooter. It was other potential threats who could have faced a stumbling block when it came to obtaining weapons when they wanted to harm people, and then weren't prevented from doing so because the Air Force didn't submit their convictions either. In February of 2022, District Judge Xavier Rodriguez found the Air Force 60% liable for the events of November 5th and ordered them to pay the plaintiffs $230 million. For obvious reasons, Michelle Shields and her daughter Annie struggled following the shooting at First Baptist. Michelle felt guilty since she was the target that he'd been searching for. And Annie was faced with a future in which she'd have to explain to her two children just what their father had done. When the pair visited the memorial at the church one day, a man there shouted at them that they should be ashamed of themselves for showing their faces there, as though it was their fault 26 people were murdered. But of course it wasn't. All guilt lies with the shooter, who called his parents during that final chase when they were in his apartment untying Annie. When he spoke to her, they had finished untying Annie, and he said, pass the phone to her, and so she took it, and she took him off speakerphone. And when he spoke to her, he said that he wouldn't make it, and then said he'd done something horrible at First Baptist. He said he loved her, and then a few minutes later said, it was your fault. The next thing Annie heard over the phone was that final gunshot that ended his life. So just imagine you are Annie, and you have gone through this horrible marriage with this awful, abusive, worthless man. And the last words that he says to you, not just are, I've just done something horrible at your family's church, but he goes from saying, I love you, to saying, it's all your fault. And those are his last words to her. It's just going out of the world, doing the same sort of abusive, horrible, awful things that you have been doing your entire life. As if it wasn't enough that he had done horrible things in that church. Awful, unforgivable things. But he had to do one more last final awful thing before he died. It's just, I just feel an enormous amount of sympathy for Annie and for her kids and for Mary and for all the other women that he mistreated and abused and assaulted over the years. Knowing full well that was where her family would be when that phone call ended, she called her mom. Annie had called, Michelle answered, and told her when she asked that she hadn't been at church that day and that she was okay. Her growing unease multiplied when the sounds of helicopters reached her, and that's when Michelle Shields raced to First Baptist. Annie just kind of was checking on her to see if she was at church, and Michelle Shields was like, "No, I'm fine. I'm not at church. I'm okay." And Annie just hung up on her. She was just so emotional that she didn't even think to say what happened. And at that point, that's when Michelle Shields hears the sound of the helicopters and realizes something really bad has happened. In March of 2018, two people who believed the First Baptist church shooting was a conspiracy created by the Department of Homeland Security were arrested for trespassing, making terroristic threats, resisting arrest, and possession of marijuana. Jody Mann and Robert Usery had been harassing the parishioners of First Baptist for months, insisting the whole thing was a false flag, just like a whole bunch of other mass shootings. Pastor Pomeroy arrived and confronted the pair as they defaced a poster at the site of the massacre, and Usery decided to use that moment to tell Pastor Pomeroy he was going to hang him from a tree and urinate on him. Unsurprisingly, they got arrested. Mann and Usery were just two of multiple people who harassed the families and the survivors, claiming the whole thing was made up. They wanted to see Annabelle's birth certificates. They wanted to see death certificates. They wanted to see proof that any of the 26 victims ever existed at all. But as Pastor Pomeroy pointed out, quote, "There was enough evidence already visible, so if he chooses not to see that, how would I know he would believe anything else?" Pastor Pomeroy is correct. As faked political tools, America's long list of mass shootings kind of suck. If they're meant to manipulate the masses, they're not working. Nothing changes, even though they keep happening. Everybody gets mad and sad for a couple of days, and then we get mad and sad about something else. Sometimes an entirely different shooting. Either they're all fake, which really isn't possible, or only some of them are fake, in which case what's the point of the fake ones if they don't accomplish any more change than what the real ones do? The only things mass shootings in this country have accomplished by now is training an entire generation, the responses they will need to skirt to complete their own brutal plans. Prior to the shooting, Carla Holcomb had been positive that First Baptist would be able to take possession of the large empty lot beside the church. They wouldn't have to buy it, she said. God would give it to them. The night the shooting occurred, many people throughout Texas and from across the country reached out to help. One of them was roofing company owner Brad Belden. With his connections and support, First Baptist accepted the donation of those 3 acres to build a new church. Belden, I guess, worked with, I guess one of his relatives was some sort of real estate lawyer, and they were able to kind of get that property and give that to them. The North American Mission Board handed over $3 million in donations so a new church could be constructed on the site. This one of cinder block and stone with windows high enough to be above the heads of the parishioners. And just as Carla Holcomb said, they didn't have to pay a dime. Chris Workman's injuries from his gunshots left him paralyzed. Stephen Williford, who'd already done something heroic enough for one lifetime, made it his mission to raise the money Chris would need to build a wheelchair-accessible home. The 2020 fundraiser covered the costs of a home that possessed everything Chris would need to live without impediments in his own home. So he could move his wheelchair through, there was a ramp, it was good. Much of the items which were left at makeshift memorials or sent to Sutherland Springs to express sympathy for the victims, letters, drawings, stuffed animals, ended up as part of an exhibit at the Sutherland Springs Historical Museum just down the highway from the church. This museum is like a little tiny museum. It is not that big, and it was a big part of their display that they had all of this stuff from when the shooting happened. The museum's exhibit also featured donated items from the families of the victims as well as the framed obituaries of those lost in the shooting. As for the church itself, the place where 26 people were murdered was painted white on the inside from top to bottom, cleared out of everything, and arranged with one white folding chair for each of the victims, just in these neat little rows. Scrawled across each chair was a victim's name, and in nearly every photo of the interior, a red flower stands upright from the chair's seat, the petals against the headrest. Each chair has a flower. They're all lined up like that. They all have the name of somebody who was lost in the shooting. For 7 years, the sanctuary was a place where locals and those from outside the community could pay their respects to those who were lost. But in recent years, the community, the church members, the victims' families, they all fought in court over whether or not to tear down that part of the church once and for all. Finally, with all legal avenues exhausted, demolition crews arrived on the site on August 12th, 2024, with heavy machinery and a sad mission. As others watched and some cried, excavators tore at the walls and pulled the little church down to the ground. At the end of the day, all that was left behind at that particular site was a pile of shredded wood and the dark memories of what happened within those broken walls. So that's that story. I almost made a TikTok video where I mentioned that when I do episodes about mass shootings, and I'm sitting here and I'm writing and I'm researching and I'm watching documentaries and all of that, I tend to notice in the news all of the mass shootings that were happening as we're writing it. All of the shootings that are happening as we're writing this. And over the course of the time that I've been writing this, Charlie Kirk was murdered. There have been several mass shootings, like multiple mass shootings at a Riverside bar in North Carolina, at the Mormon church in Michigan. There was an active shooter about 5 or 10 minutes away from my parents' campsite the other day. And every time I would see a new one, I was just like banging my head off a wall going, maybe I'm making this happen. You start to get a little paranoid. I do have generalized anxiety disorder. This is what happens. And I start to be like, why am I doing this? Why am I writing the script? Why am I working on this? And because it was starting to feel like writing scripts like this is making them happen. And the thing is, that's not true. They're happening in this country and they're not stopping and they just keep going, and nobody does anything. Sometimes we try, but it doesn't work. The gun culture that we have in America is one where it's going to be really difficult to get everybody in this country to cut back on having so many weapons, or there are a lot of people, like, for example, Stephen Williford, who treat guns with the respect they deserve. They're not like, playing around with them. Those are not toys. They are weapons. You need to train with them. You need to learn how to use them, and you need to learn proper care and handling and safety, keeping them in a safe, all of that. So, there are people like that out there who don't have more guns than they need. I would think you need like maybe, a handful of guns and a lot of ammo if what you need to use it for is to protect your home in case of some terrible thing or whatnot. But anyway, the thing is that it's difficult to make a dent in the gun culture that we have in this country. There are so many people who think that a gun solves everything, and you can't get them to move past that. There are plenty of people who have reasonable treatment of guns and respect for guns and rifles and all of that. They are, they may have accidents one day in their home. They may be able to scare off a robber. They may go hunting with their guns. Whatever it is, in terms of their guns, they're not going to be the person who like whips out their gun and waves it in the air, gets, pictures taken of them holding it while they're in a swimsuit standing by the pool. Like, they're not going to be, irresponsible with their weapons. They are going to try and be as responsible as possible, and if something happens, it is not going to be intentional. But there are so many people who it's not even a matter of mental health issues or things like that. It is just they're just generally irresponsible, and they just shouldn't have weapons. It's just a little terrifying sometimes when I do episodes like this. And I started doing this because I was, thinking to myself, I'm having a hard time writing something. Let me pick a disaster, a tragedy, something that I have been thinking about a lot lately. And I keep thinking about Sutherland Springs because of the reasons that people have been trying to find for why people commit mass shootings. And there have been so many debates the last few weeks about people and their political beliefs in regards to why they committed mass shootings. When it came to Charlie Kirk, I pretty much said at one point, we need to all acknowledge that there were a lot of people who did not like him on both sides of the political spectrum. Like, he had a lot of people who didn't like him. And sitting around trying to pinpoint exactly what the political beliefs are of the person who shot him, you can't just guess just because of who he is. He just was disliked by a lot of people. But the thing is that, it ends up coming down to, with that particular shooter, it seemed to come down to, I just don't like him, which was something that I was kind of saying. Like, there are some people who do these shootings, and their political beliefs are, like, secondary to the reason behind why they did what they did. In this particular instance, there is reference to the shooter's political beliefs in the Secret Service report, but not, like, specifically. They do mention that at the point where he was online just harassing women, he was at one point harassing women who had different political beliefs than him. Didn't say what those political beliefs were. Didn't say if he was conservative, if he was, if he was more far to the right than that, if he was socialist, leftist, liberal, whatever you want to, either side. He could have been libertarian. It didn't say. What was more important than that, especially given his decision making for why he targeted the place that he targeted, was his treatment of women, his violence against women throughout his life. And that was way more important than that. That's not to say that politics of a shooter are never important, but sitting around every day and watching mass shootings happen and going, okay, so who did he vote for in the last presidential election? Like, sometimes that doesn't matter. A lot of the times it doesn't matter. Sometimes it's just, something that they don't like, and it doesn't matter what side of the aisle they're on. There are plenty of people who are, for example, conservative or liberal or whatever, either side of the aisle, who don't like trans people. So asking about their politics, if somebody, say, targeted a bar where, a gay bar where a lot of trans people congregate on a night, that's, celebrating trans people or whatever. If somebody were to attack a bar like that today, it's entirely possible they could be liberal or they could be conservative, because the trans community has been so targeted by so many people at this point. So it could be possible either way. But what is more important than that is the fact that they don't like trans people. More than what they're registered as voting wise or who they voted for in the last election or anything like that. It's one of those things where it can play a part. It might even be the inspiration behind what's happening. But there are times where some of this stuff is really performative. There are shooters who do things, and this goes all the way back to Columbine, where the shooters there were doing things to like get a rise out of people. And they had been doing that for a while. And so much of their plans were not what they expected them or wanted them to be, which is always something that I find almost morbidly amusing when I read about a mass shooter who reads up on Columbine and you know, worships the two shooters, because they screwed up. Like, everything they planned for, they had bombs in their cars, they had bombs in the cafeteria, they had, you planned on shooting all of these people, and then they got real tired of it, and were like, well, maybe we should just start knifing people. Like, it just is so pathetic when you read about the actual events of that day. The things that they did were just so pathetic. And the plans that they had and how badly they failed, and that there are so many mass shooters out there who were like, I wanted to do another Columbine. You want to fail miserably at what you planned? Here's hoping. Like, it's just so annoying and so frustrating on a very just on a weird level. And so when I got to the part of the script when I was going through the Secret Service report, and they were saying how he was researching mass shooters, and I felt the way I always kind of feel when I read about mass shooters researching mass shooters, which is I need to get another hobby. But it is something that I kind of had to stop and be like, okay, I'm not researching these for that, but it's something that you can't, you get a little, unnerved by the fact that these people are so like aspirational. Oh, I want to be like this shooter, or that shooter. Oh, this shooter got on the news, so if I write on bullets, then I can get on the news too. It's like, if you write the right thing on a bullet, then, despite the fact that you're supposed to use the bullets, why would you leave some behind? It seems like, you want to use all of your bullets. But anyway, yeah, there are just, there's just so many things about doing this episode right now that this 3-parter that I really should have, I really should have stopped at some point just for my own mental health. But, for some reason, I was okay through most of this. I think a lot of what made things difficult was reading about the violence he committed against women. I was at the bookstore today shopping because it's my birthday. I am 48 today, and again, I'm recording this on September 29th, which is my birthday, and I decided to go shopping today, buy myself a couple of things. I actually planned to go to a record store and buy myself some stuff as like a little shopping spree, present to myself. But I was there, and there was a book that I saw on the nonfiction shelf about the way that men behave online with women, and the treatment of women online, and the harassment and threats and all of the things that go on. And it was a lot, especially after doing this episode. So yeah, that was something where I was like, I would buy this book under any other circumstances because I find this subject interesting, but I don't think I could do this right now. Maybe another time. So, so it's my birthday. I'm going to finish doing this. I'm going to set these episodes up so you can all listen to them. And I just want to say that I hope that all of you are having a good fall, a good autumn. I love autumn. It's my favorite time of year. It is just, I love pumpkins and Halloween and pumpkin spice and all of that stuff. I mean, horror movies, everything. So I hope you're all enjoying it the same way that I am. I love the crunchy leaves and everything. So, and I just wanted to say that if you can find the time to get away from everything, especially the news cycle, just do it. I'm taking the rest of the week off to give myself a mental health break. Professor is at camp. He's having a blast. I sent his favorite treats along with him, freeze-dried chicken hearts. So he's got those. And a friend of mine at work, coworker, is going to get him his weekly cheeseburger, which should go over really well. But yeah. I am going to do absolutely nothing, and I'm going to enjoy every minute of it. So I recommend that you guys do too, because there's a lot going on right now in the world, and you need it, or else it's not going to be good. So yeah, just take a break, take a nap, take whatever it is that you need to separate yourself from your phone, the internet, social media, whatever, for an hour or two a day, because you need it. Trust me, I keep trying to intentionally do it. That's why I've been collecting records. That's why I've been, staying off the internet for a little bit here and there, working on craft projects and whatnot. So yeah. Enjoy yourselves. Go out and, touch grass. I think we all need to go touch grass or touch crunchy leaves right now, because it's fall and it's so beautiful. I love fall. Thank you guys for listening, and until next time, stay safe.